Everyone, welcome to our next split video. We're going to be working with the same essential question for the next several split videos. And that essential question is, what does it mean to think like a geographer? And that's a pretty broad topic, and hence why we're going to break it down into several different videos and several different lessons. But these videos are going to be organized around the 5 themes of geography. Now, these themes have actually already seeped into what we've started to discuss. But we're going to center our first one around location. So I'd actually like you to title the flip video with the entire title that you see here. Flipped 1.4, what does it mean to think like a geographer? And location. All right, let's get started. So, as I just mentioned, there are 5 themes of geography. Now, some may argue that these themes are now outdated. In fact, we're going to take a look at a reading that analyzes whether or not these 5 concepts truly encapsulate what it means to be a geographer in the modern age. But these were formulated by National Geographic and other groups. And these are essentially the 5 lenses through which geographers study the world. So the little graphic there at the bottom is I want you to consider, literally, I want you to think about those glasses being each one of the themes of geography. And those themes are the way in which geographers see the world. We study the location, the place, the interactions, movement, and regions. And those collectively are now known as what's called the geographic perspective. And that's what we're going to hone in on and hope that by the end of the year, actually really by the end of this unit, that you're going to now be assuming that geographic perspective and understand what it means to analyze the world through the lens of geography. So let's begin with just location. Let's put the location on the left-hand side of the notes because we're going to define this theme and then break down those 3 components a little bit more specifically. So beginning, geographers seek to identify specific location on Earth's surface. Now, of course, this is sounds very basic. They need to figure out where things are. But this can mean different things. For example, the first part of the definition is exactly what you assume it to be, trying to find the geographical position of a place on Earth's surface. The second component is looking at the geographical situation of people and things, meaning where something is relative to something else. And lastly, to see the distribution. This is going to be very verbose, very wordy. And I'm going to break that down more specifically. The distribution of various locations of a collection of people or objects. So where groups of people and things are located in relation to one another. So let's start off with the first component of what it means to study location. The first example I provide for you is one that you're already familiar with, which is finding absolute location, using those lines of longitude and latitude to find the precise location on Earth's surface. There are other ways, though, that we can figure out the geographical position on Earth's surface. Now, a quick note about organization of notes. At this point, I would recommend that you put what's quoted in, or what's in those quotation marks on the left-hand side of your notes, so that we have these notes organized around the different ways in which a geographer can study location. So we're focusing on finding position first. You can find position through absolute location. We've already discussed that. You can also find position through the toponym, which is a term to describe the name of a place. The toponym is actually something that you may not necessarily always consider. It's sort of, we can almost become blind to it. But what we decide to name things, specifically roads, streets, places, landmarks, that's a significant indication of cultural components of a group of people, history of a group of people, the natural environment of that particular place. So here's a little snapshot. I just Googled street names in DC. So you can see the toponyms here. We've got Langston Hughes Way. We have Independence Avenue. We have Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, or Boulevard too. With all of these names, they're a reflection of the culture of the people. That Independence Avenue is a reflection of the place that we're in, what the function of this city is. These toponyms can also be geographical, things like if you're actually Hillcrest, for example, in the neighborhood there, if you obviously a reference to physical environment. So places, the toponym can actually be a really important tool for geographers, and one that we're going to experiment with in class. Here's another example, just of this, the longest toponym, one of the longest toponyms in the world. It's a town in the Netherlands, and it's a long description of something like the river by the place and blah, blah, blah. So just point being that toponyms can have a really, they're really a set of clues for geographers. Another way that geographers can determine the geographical position on Earth's surface is through sight. Sight, we'll go ahead and put on the left-hand side. Sight are the physical characteristics of a place. We're talking about climate. We're talking about water sources. We're talking about the topography. Topography means how elevated something is. We're talking about the quality of the soil or the type of soil, vegetation. These are all examples of the physical environment or physical characteristics of a place. That's known as a place's site. So, for example, if we're studying here with in this picture of Manhattan, then if you're describing the physical characteristics, you're clearly going to be focusing upon access to water. Then the topography. This is extremely low lying, hence why Manhattan faces a lot of trouble with flooding during major storms. So physical characteristics of a place help us understand where it is. We also describe location. We also describe where something is based upon where that place is relative to other places. Another way of saying that is their situation. If you're describing a place's situation, you're describing where that place is in relation to other places. So, for example, if we look at that map of Washington, D.C., we could describe Washington, D.C.'s situation as south of Philadelphia, north of Charlotte, North Carolina, uh, east of the Appalachian Mountains, and west of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, that didn't tell you exactly where it is. What I just described did not give you a precise understanding of Washington, D.C.'s location. It described where Washington, D.C. is relative to other places. Another example of that is over here in what's known as the Rust Belt, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail both now and later in the year. That region of the United States is the former manufacturing belt of the United States. Many of you may be familiar with Detroit's manufacturing, formerly very much known for the production of cars. You'll notice that what's shown in red there, the Rust Belt area, is directly next to this coal mining industrial area. That makes sense. The Rust Belt was situated in a place that was close to where they could get coal to then fuel the factories. In other words, the Rust Belt was its relative location, its situation was close to that of the coal mining area. So again, situation is where something is relative to another place. Why we look at these? Why care about situation? Why is that helpful for us, right? Why not just say it's located here and here at this absolute location? What's the point of understanding where something is situated? The reason why is because when we understand where something is relative to other places, it helps us understand the centrality of a given place. It helps us understand how important or how powerful a particular place is within a given region. So, for example, if we're looking at Chicago, Chicago is a transportation hub. It's got rail. It's a rail hub. It's one of the busiest airports, really in the world, because it's got one of the its situation, its relative location is such that it's right in the middle of, well, not right in, but it's very centrally located in the continental United States. It's right along the Great Lakes. It's got a particularly important central place there. So when we look at where something is relative to other places, it helps us understand how important a place is. Here's, as I just mentioned, the air travel routes. You can see the massive number of planes coming in and out of Chicago's, particularly O'Hare's airport, on a daily basis. That helps us see the centrality of that. If we look at Singapore, just to get yourself acquainted here on this map, we're in Southeast Asia. If you see where I have circled around Malaysia, Singapore is a very small island. It's actually a city-state that's just south there of Malaysia. And if we're we understand the importance of Singapore, not because of its absolute location, not because it's located at this degrees of longitude and latitude, but because Singapore is situated in a place, it is close to many of the booming economies. It has those ports, the Strait of Singapore, in between Indonesia and Singapore itself, that can go straight through to the Philippines and up through to China and Japan. We understand Singapore's economic significance when we understand its relative location, where it is located relative to other places. So that just gives us an understanding of all the different ways that a geographer understands location, beyond just simply finding a point on a map. Let's go ahead and switch to, oh, I think these are mislabeled. Yes, I'm sorry. Let's go to that one. My apologies. This says 2, or excuse me, it says 3 there for location. That should read 2 because we're now going to look at the second component of location, of how geographers study location. Please put what's in quotation marks on the left-hand side because geographers look at the distribution of various collections of things over space, where things are located over space. Now remember, when I say space, I'm talking about area of Earth's surface. I'm not talking about outer space. So one way we discuss that is density. Geographers are concerned with how much of something there is. So the formal definition is the frequency of something over space. How much of it is there? I gave a quick little graphic there that's a little bit more familiar to a science classroom, but the concept still applies here. After all, geography is very much rooted in science. We have here a high density. There's a lot more of those little dots on the left than there are on the right. Very straightforward. Let's apply that now, not to that ions, or that atoms molecules that I took for that graphic from. And let's look at this as geographers when we talk about housing, right? If you have a single family home, that's very low density housing. One family lives in that large amount of space. Similarly, with the suburbs on the whole, you've got low density housing. Medium density, we might see townhouses. And high density, there are a lot of people who can live in that given place. So density is just the number of things there are. Now this is where this is going to get a little bit confusing. Concentration, I'm going to read you the formal definition, then let's break it down, is the extent of something's spread over space. In other words, when you're looking at concentration, geographers look at how close or how far things are from one another. That is not the same thing as density. For example, you could have perhaps a neighborhood, and I'm looking right now at the very low density house. I want you to imagine a neighborhood. Let's just take a square. If all of those houses, in fact, I'm just going to use this right here. Imagine this house. Imagine these houses are here, right? Imagine if all of the houses were in this tiny little box that I'm making right here. That they're very concentrated if all of this was open space. Alternatively, if each one of these houses, there's very low density because there's only one person living or one family there, and they're spread out, that's called dispersed. So here's what I mean. Let's look over here on the left. This is a clustered settlement, right? It's not very high density. There's a lot of houses there, but they're very low density. There's only one family living in each one of those houses, so the density is small. The number of people on the left is still pretty low, but they're very clustered because they're very close to one another. Alternatively, now I tried to find a picture of the similar housing settlement. Let's say that there's this exact same number of houses. Take all of these houses and put them on this map. The density hasn't changed. The same number of people on the left are now living on the right, but their houses are now spread out. Density is the same across the two, but concentration has changed. They're more dispersed. So geographers are not just concerned with, in this picture here, how many people live, how many people can live in this apartment building. They're also interested in how many apartment buildings are there directly around this. How many houses are directly around this? How many houses are there over here in this given neighborhood? So we're looking not just where things are, how many people there are, but how many people there are in relation to one another. That's a repeat there, so let's skip ahead. Geographers also look at, when they're describing the location of where things are, they look at the kind of patterns that people are organized in. Now, I've continued to select housing just because it's an easy way to visually show this, but this could apply to many, many different things. Geographers look at, when I say pattern, I'm talking about how they're geometrically arranged over space. Geographers would look at the way a cul-de-sac of houses is arranged versus a downtown city street. Here, there's two different ways you can describe that distribution over space. I described it in a linear pattern. You can see here, this is, we're going to take a look at this actually when we talk about different land use patterns, but you can see on this river here that the houses are really arranged in a very linear fashion. Proximity to the river is clearly important, as is proximity to that road. I drew in these lines here. You can see, a geographer would describe the housing here as a linear pattern because it's essentially in a line. If those of you who have taken geometry or who are currently enrolled in geometry, you're more familiar with this. There's a geographic term that's called the sine curve. That's a way to, well, actually, I'm going to stop myself before I pretend to be a math teacher here, but this is called a sine curve on a graph. This is also a term that geographers use. It's very often used for mapping things. Perhaps one year this happened, then it went down, then it went back up, then down. Perhaps population would be a place where this would come into play. But sometimes geographers describe where things are located in a sinuous curve or a pattern or a sine curve. This is really most relevant. It doesn't come up too often in our studies, but it is relevant to just describing where things are. So those are the three ways. Let's just revisit for a second what it is we just talked about, because I just threw a lot of ideas at you. One of the components of what it means to be a geographer is to study location. And that does mean to understand the geographical position on Earth's surface, be it by absolute location, relative location, or toponym. Geographers also look at where things are located relative to one another. So they look at the situation. Where is DC relative to other big cities? Where are the favelas, the slums of Brazil, located relative to the downtown area? We don't just look at where things are in isolation, we look at where they are relative to other places. And lastly, we look at where things are, the distribution of groups of people and things, and how close, how many there are, the density, and the concentration, how close or dispersed things are over space. I know these ideas are very abstract at this point. I know these are not very concrete facts. But once we nail down this terminology, we're going to be able to apply this terminology to each and every one of the units of study that we start to engage in. Okay, here are your analysis questions. I just want to review number 3 for you, and then we'll wrap it up there. The Rust Belt is a term used to describe the Midwestern region of the United States that used to be the manufacturing hub of the United States. Now, many of these factories have moved to the south, an area that's called the Sun Belt. Because when I'm looking right here, here's that Rust Belt. Okay, so many of these factories have moved to the south, or they've been moved overseas, and those jobs are now gone for the people who live there. How has the centrality of the Rust Belt changed since the early 20th century? In other words, when I'm asking you, when I taught you situation, I said that we understand how important a place is relative to the places around it. If all of these factories have moved or are gone, how has that affected the centrality of this Rust Belt region? All right, so please make sure you label your analysis questions with the exact same title that you see up here. And you've got all 5 taken care of. We'll see you in class.